All right, traders, welcome to today's recap. This is Christian from Hertz Tribeca Trade Group, and it is Monday, April 8th, first day of the week. A little bit sleepy today, but finished off in the right direction. So, adjectives to kind of describe the little bit the beginning of the day, probably I don't know, digestion. Maybe not congestion, but yeah, I mean those kinds of things. I talked about just a couple points that we put out in the weekend newsletter, which is always kind of the starting point. I do a lot of research on the weekends and really try to get ready for the week, just so that I have a plan. I kind of know what I'm looking for. I know what I'm looking to do in the beginning of the week. Do that research, and this way on Monday, I come and execute. Right? So that's basically what I do every weekend. I usually spend a Saturday or a Sunday going through a number of charts, going through the indices, the sectors, all that, just kind of a plan of action, or better yet, a plan to attack. And whether or not I actually want to attack or just kind of lay back a little bit. And so one of the points that we came away with, and this was all kind of towards the end of last week, we were talking about how the S&P was running into that purple line virgin point of control. So this is a 1 hour virgin point of control, and we've got another one up here, I believe, but it's going to be higher. But I thought we would get a little bit of digestion. So this is 29, basically 29.40 is the next level, but I thought we would get a little bit of digestion. And then the major takeaway that I said was, and I didn't know if we were going to get this all Monday, but I always put I put my summary thoughts, a couple takeaways from the week, and then I always have my conclusion after we put the once we put together the index charts, then I put together my conclusion. So basically my thought was that we would get a little bit of digestion, but I was really thinking that that the dip gets bought. And we really weren't down that much today. I was actually hoping that we would come in a little bit more than what we were. But, the value areas coupled with the analysis and the technicals really gives me a nice plan. So we had one bar that hit the top of value, and that was basically it, right? That's as far as we went to the downside. So that's and it's something that I put out in my write-up this morning as well, just levels to watch, and perfect bounce off of that bottom of value. So that was the main thing that I was watching today. I think we did a great job at executing. It was a slower day. It had a little bit of time, or had a little bit of difficulty getting into value and then getting above value, but it just kept on trying to, butting up against that top of value, and then finally we took it out and closed basically right on the highs of the day. Qs were a little bit different. Qs, I think, were a little bit weaker in the morning, and I kind of attacked a little bit on the Qs this morning, and a couple names in Amazon, which I'll go over. I'll go over our Amazon setup that we had in the newsletter. I'll say the Amazon setup, which was my best trade of the day. Let me bring up Amazon here. But again, this was all through research, and this is why I always say that a big part of being a member of Tribeca Trade Group is, I do the research. I try to do the research for the members and kind of set it up nice. But this is what I was looking at, and I was going through, again, my normal routine of charts, and sometimes you don't have to go too far to find a really good setup. And I saw this on Saturday morning, and I was like, look at this Amazon. And this is something, this is Amazon kind of been in and out of all throughout the year. But what I really liked is, number one, if we start with the weekly chart with Amazon, it managed to get above value, which was really 1772 was the level that I was watching. Now, once we did that, we kind of just went. And you could see then if we scale into the daily chart, you could see a closer level to watch is 1823, but we closed there above value. And I think there's really some nice defined support. Then if we draw in a little bit closer, which, for like a 1 week trade, notice what we did today. We fell right into support. And what I'm looking at, and we talked about two different trades that you could put on. Basically, one to get the first virgin point of control, and there should be another one up here too, which it might just take think or swim. But basically what I'm looking at in Amazon is this 1868. Might have to just go up. There it is. A little bit further. The other one is 1809. So we'll see if we take this one out first. What also draws me to this is not only the technicals, but we're going to have earnings in a couple weeks for Amazon, and you might see a lot of times we see with Amazon a run into earnings, and then by the time you get to earnings, sometimes the trade is done, right? It gets overbought on earning by the time you reach earnings day. So I think a lot of times it makes sense to have that pre-earnings type run into earnings trade. So that's what we put on today. And by the way, I mean, it's set up perfectly, and I even said this. Whoops, I hate when Thinkorswim does this. But I even had the game plan of, hey, if this thing sells off on Monday, which again I was looking for a little bit of, maybe just a slight move down. I think it was down about 0.5% today. And I said I like these if Amazon dips a bit in the beginning of the week. So I got that today. I just didn't think that we were going to fall into value here. I just thought we had really nice support on the 1 hour. So I scaled in. I think I started buying on this one, this candle, at about 5 or 10 minutes after the open, and then I scaled in again because again I never really go in all in at once. I basically scale in, especially when you're dealing with some of these short-term trades. But that was the plan, and we were able to hit 2 targets in that trade. So again, always full transparency at Tribeca Trade Group. It's not so much if I can't get into a trade, I'll mention it and I'll say consider this trade. But for the most part, we're trading, and we're not after-the-fact callers. But this was my trade about 9:41, so I waited 10 minutes, and then I went ahead and bought. I managed to get this this call spread in at 10 o'clock, 20 minutes later at 260. So my average cost basis was right around 275. And then we were able to take that second target, which is a really nice performance gain. So again, I shot a video on using call spreads for weeklies, right? I really think if you're going to traffic in short-term trades like this, if you manage to hit it right and a really trending day, then of course just buying calls outright. But to me, it's very hard to hold just weekly calls outright. Without, you can make, a lot of times you'll take a position off, you're like, oh, I just made 10% or 15%. But these, the call spreads, you can kind of just sit in because you're not, instead of spending like $10 for a contract that expires, at the end of the week, which I think is just very risky. It could go wrong on you very quickly. In just a matter of 5 or 10 minutes, you could be out a lot of money. This, you could basically monitor, you could adjust it, and you could get that double or triple with it too, without having to kind of worry about or having this be the only trade on your books, having to watch it like a hawk. So this worked out really well, and then I just added to a few other positions. Like, a couple of trades I made sure that I hit a target, even if they weren't. It's very important, like, to not be rigid in your taking targets. So for example, and this usually happens when I get a new trader in the room, they say, okay, on your option trades, your swing trades, what are you going to set your targets to? And I say, well, maybe 15% is my first target, then maybe at 30%. But I always say that's a guide because sometimes we just can't get that 15%. And, XBI, I put on a call spread last week, the May 94.99 call spread. And I think I put that on around $1.80. And I took my first target at, I think, 205. Oh, it should be right here. 205, right? So the reason why I'm not greedy and just try to take something for profits off, because a lot of times you could put the trade or the target right back on, and you could put it for cheaper. So that's exactly what happened. Late on Friday, I took target number 1, and I still very much like this trade in biotech. So I was able to put that target back on for cheaper. So again, the power of taking targets and not being super greedy, because you just don't know, especially over a weekend or just through the course of trading. No one has a crystal ball, so you got to lock some profits off. Again, I always want to let the overall trade run, but with options, I think sometimes people don't realize the amount of power that they have with options and the amount of leverage that they can really maneuver with. So you don't always have to wait for like a double or triple. You could get there, but sometimes you take a few targets and you add it back, and then eventually you get there to a double or triple. But it doesn't have to be all in one block step. I think that's very difficult with option trading and something that you learn over time. So that said, this video is for information purposes only, of course. I say that every video. A couple other things, just names that I was looking for. ZS didn't exactly work, but this was a name that we were looking at towards the end of last week. That's fine, and that's why I purchased stock with it. It basically, I don't want to say it has to hold here. It's got a little bit more. It can move down. I may add to it. I just put on 100 shares of this for now. 60.49 is really the support, but I thought it had a chance to kind of, sometimes these names, the buyers come right back into them. So no buy signal, I would say, yet, but I know always when I enter the trade where I would get out, and that's at 60, basically 60.50, that bottom of value. So again, a high mover, and with these names that really move a lot, sometimes 100 shares is all that you need, considering, if you measure the what's the not the implied move, but if you measure the ATR, the average true range, you want to make sure that you're looking at the volatility of a name and not just put like a set dollar amount into each trade. Right? If you put a set dollar amount into each trade, you're not taking into account the volatility of each name, right? So Apple has a different volatility in the stock itself versus Zscaler, or if you trade Procter and Gamble, has a very different volatility than say Amazon, for example, right? Completely different volatility in the name, not the option I'm talking about, but just in the name itself. All right, so that's just a little bit of background because today was a slower day, so I don't have a ton of things to really talk about. Some of the underperformers from last week, which generally happens, they outperformed. The gold miners were up. I think the dollar was down a little bit today. We'll talk a little bit about commodities. UUP was down 35 basis points, so kind of allowed or kind of helped gold to rally a little bit. I don't have anything on in this space right now. Not really looking to do much. Just too difficult of a trade. What I do like is the platinum and palladium. These, I think, both finished up. I talked about that hammer bar being taken out, or excuse me, the version point of control being taken out with a hammer bar. I said that backwards. And then platinum, which was up 1%, it did take out a virgin point of control, I believe. Let me let this just adjust here for a second. But I believe this was taken out. Yep. So you do have more behind it. We'll see if it kind of comes in and puts like a flag pattern together. So I think that is interesting. A couple other names on my watch list that we talked about in the weekend newsletter. So we spent a good section on energy. My view on the energy trade is maybe to have some exposure, but I don't want to jump into like 3 or 4 different energy names. It's just been too difficult of a trade. Also, whenever, like, I've been trying to kind of advocate a little bit, when you take trades, is it a name that you really love? Or is it just that you're trying to get involved in the momentum? Again, day trading, much different than swing trading. Day trading, you can pretty much trade anything you like. You don't need to have a huge amount of conviction. But if you're going to sit in a swing trade for a couple weeks or even longer, you really have to like the name or like the group. In this sense, energy, I don't know if I really like the group, like, that I want to be in a ton of energy names. Again, I want some exposure. So we spent some time and talked about that. You kind of have a doji candle for XOP, so it is out of the range. We'll see if it can continue. I do think it could possibly get to this 34.85. But I also covered, which I think are a little bit under the radar, is the solar names, which have just been on fire. Sorry, bad joke. Uh, but if you look at names like First Solar, this is my second favorite name going into the week. The first one was Amazon, but First Solar the chart looks beautiful. And it's now getting out of this range, which has been, kind of back and forth. At this point, if you missed it, I did kind of something stupid about a week ago. I was in First Solar, and I just in stock, and it just wasn't working out. I think I added it somewhere in here, but I was in this for about 2 months. It felt like. Um, and I got out once it got back to my cost basis. I was kind of underwater in the trade for a little bit, and I got back at its cost basis. And of course, now it gets going. So I added back a starter position, although at this point I feel like I am chasing. So with a starter position, I'm not going to care too much. Where I would want to get involved, again, just thinking ahead, a couple steps ahead, is if it checks back to 55.16. I think that's a great place to get involved. The only thing with this is we're going to have earnings, and we're going to be saying this a lot going forward, is that we're going to be having, you have to watch for names that have earnings or when they occur. So perhaps the solar ETF might be a little bit better. First Solar is about a 10% weight in this. Notice you do have that Virgin point of control that's coming into play about $1 ahead. But so a little bit different way to play the group is maybe just through the ETF itself. Let me just touch upon option activity for about a minute. It wasn't bad. I don't think I took anything in terms of option activity, but we did see some call buying. We've seen XOP now for the last few days. A lot of like small little bites like this, but aggressive sweep. Snap, we continue to see call buyers in. So we did see BP, WNB, I think MPC we saw calls again. Saw EMR calls, Swept, that was a name that got upgraded. Sony, Sony we've been seeing call buying now probably for the last week, but they bought a little bit of calls right before there was announced that an activist investor might be involved in, I think, Third Point. So big jump in Sony. Up 8%, closed right around the highs. Look at the volume in this one. And then they bought some calls later in the day as well. Yeah, so again, a lot of energy. A little bit of Disney. Remember, Disney's Investor Day is on Thursday. Who knows? I didn't like how this thing closed. I was kind of contemplating a trade in Disney, but look at it stalled out the same place again. So I've had a lot of people ask me about Disney. I just think the stock is so range bound that I would rather be late. And if it's late, right, again, it all depends on what kind of a move that you're looking for. But, I do think it may not be a bad idea, always like a buy the rumor, sell the news trade. So maybe you could buy something cheap now and then sell it on Wednesday before the news. Again, buy the rumor, sell the news type trade. Maybe it gets back up to 118. It's got to get above value. 115.39 is the bogey in this one. So again, probably disappointing some people. Interesting SE. There was calls, but I looked at the implied volatility. I'm not sure that they were bought. So I am in this trade of SE. It's hanging on. It's barely hanging on for my stop right now. So I'll just have to pay attention here. But they bought calls in here. Again, always important to foot the time that they bought the calls. Not the best sign that all this volume and it just could not get going. So it's hanging on by a thread for me, and I may get stopped out on it tomorrow. Not the biggest deal in the world if that happens. PBR. Another name that's repeat call activity. Love PBRs. Just kidding. Let's look at the weekly chart first. Weekly chart, it is above this range at this point. 1487. Notice it never really broke into the yearly value area on that weekly chart. And it looks pretty interesting on the daily chart too. So PBR can get going. It tends to get momentum with it. It might be something I might be looking to try. I mentioned to have something, some exposure to the energy space. VSAT saw some calls. That name was up a lot today. Western Digital, a little bit more of IWM calls. RH saw a little bit of calls. So, I've got a lot more trades on here than puts. Maybe there's a couple other put trades on here. And then also this trade at the end of the day, let's see, did they cancel it? Here it is. Interesting. Somebody threw this trade right at the end of the day. UVXY, which is leveraged VIX. It's like we see this from time to time. Somebody betting on volatility, but this is the second or third time I've seen a big trade like this, a bet on volatility. February 2025 strike calls. So they go in the money. And look at the bet. It's $3.3 million. And again, somebody just did this, what, 17 seconds before the cutoff? Or I'm sorry, maybe I'm reading that wrong. Maybe a minute before the cutoff. So anyway, somebody's betting on a little bit of volatility. Keep in mind the VIX is down to a 13. So right now, even though I wasn't really satisfied completely with the dip that it wasn't deep enough today, but that's okay. I mean, it's kind of tough right now because I've got a lot of setups that I like, but you have to ask yourself, how much risk do you want to put on at this point and going into earnings season? So it's tough. It's tough to be really disciplined when you're seeing a lot of good-looking setups because there's about 5 or 6 other names that I really like as well, but I'm just not going to put them on because I don't think it's the right time. So, and of course, you kind of maintain that watch list and kind of just wait and be patient because I do think at some point we're due for like a 0.5% down day or 1% down day. There, I want to make sure I've got plenty of capital to deploy because I think that will be another dip that gets bought. All right, guys, so we'll leave it there. And again, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know when that's going to happen. But at this point, being that we've been up for, I don't know, 7 or 8 days in a row, I think it makes sense. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow.